Hey, all right, everybody. Nice to see you. For those that I know, hello again. For those that I don't know, hi for the first time. I'm Assistant Dean Andrew Lotz. I'm the um, Assistant Dean of Academic Program Development, like Curriculum Development in the Dietrich School. And I'm also a teaching professor in political science and director of undergraduate studies in political science. So, have worked with ungrading for some time myself individually, have advised faculty on it, and have, when asked to run a session on it today, for reasons we'll talk about in the talk. I was happy to do so and to step forward and get an initial conversation going on this practice, which is complicated and fun and powerful and intimidating. And so that's why I wanted to do it. As I mentioned, this will be recorded. Feel free to put questions into the chat as we go. I'll get to them if I can. Otherwise, I'll address them at the end and we can unmute and chat at the end as well. So. Um, Here's the agenda for today. And if you need to park me in the upper right corner of your screen, nothing will be there. So, um, uh, today we're going to talk about why consider innovation in grading. What's the point of it? And we'll talk about it as a way to do better pedagogical practice and to adjust your ratio of time to outcome in the classroom. And then we'll talk about the elephant in the room. The reason that I was asked, in part offered to do this, was that we're going to experience an increase in some class sizes because of enrollments, and how do we deal with increased class sizes? And a lot of people in the meeting I was in was kicking around, well, let's talk to faculty about ungrading. And I said, well, I can have a conversation about that and what that does with to help manage increased class size and might not manage increased class size. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what ungrading and alternative assessments bring to the table. I will not go into too much depth on any one practice because there are so many of them. But I'm going to talk generally about how you go about finding what you want to do, ways to innovate it, ways to build on it, things like that. I'm going to talk about myths about ungrading and alternative assessment. In particular, it's not exactly easier and it's not exactly faster, though I have found both of those to be, in a way, something I get out of switching one of my classes to ungrading modes. I'm going to talk about a mantra of slow is smooth, smooth is fast, because I think that's the very best way to approach our thinking about this. If we're thinking about innovating our teaching practice in an environment where we're at least partially saying, okay, I might be innovating my teaching practice, thinking about maybe larger class sizes, slow, smooth, smooth is fast is the way I'm going to talk about it. Um, and I'm going to make the suggestions that sample the menu rather than eat the whole buffet when it comes to ungrading is very possible. That thinking through and rethinking through the why of our assessments as instructors is what we should be doing all the time, anyways. And ungrading at its very core asks us to do that, and why I'm really attracted to this process. Even in classes I don't decide to do ungrading, I find the ungrading approach to be really valuable to thinking about why I do those things. And thinking how something being more rewarding for students might mean more student buy-in, which might mean better work, which in some ways may ease some of the grading. And finally, because I like to be as practical as I can, I'm going to talk about a sample timeline for strategizing how to include this in your own practice and some concluding thoughts. So that's where we're going. So why consider innovation in grading? Well, it's what we do. It's what we ought always be doing. We want to be revising what we do. We want to be thinking about how can we do it better? How can we do it more usefully? Increasingly, people have been discussing the practice of ungrading, which is an umbrella term for a whole ton of stuff. And there are lots of scholars who want to play different games of categorizing because, of course, that's what we do as academics sometimes. We play the oh, well, ungrading is different than specifications grading. Those are two different things. Other people say, oh, those are the same type of thing. I'm going to reference a few, just I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. a few key pieces that I think are really good to consider if you're thinking about doing these things. You'll see these pop up again, and my very last screen, which I'll stay on for a while, has all these references too, so you get them. But a lot of my thinking here is drawn from a couple of sources. Susan Blum's Ungrading, Why Rating Students Undermines Learning and What to Do Instead, and Jesse Stommel's Undoing the Grade. Stommel wrote one of the chapters in Bloom's book, and it's a very their own very good piece of work there. And so we know that this is part of the innovation discussion going on in higher education, so we want to talk about it. Um, Other reasons why to consider innovation in grading. Well, lots of times we grade like we were trained, I find. When I really started pushing myself on why do I do it this way, it was, well, that's what I saw. That's what my professor did. That's what that classroom is like, right? That's, you the whole time when you went through the classes and then you TA'd in those classes and then you offered them your first time yourself, like it was you were using someone else's plan. And so we replicate the institutions in which we're grown. Um, but I think it's important to question those kind of things. And I think that's where a big chunk of the ungrading approach wants to push us. Um, Ungrading as a practice um, recognizes that grades and grading practices may meet certain asks, but may fail some or all student learning, and in particular, specific types of ways that we engage with grading. It may not actually lead to learning, or it may not be making them learn the things we're hoping that they'll learn, right? I well might be training my students to meet a deadline with minimally sufficient work, which is different than really taking time to think about a political theoretic argument. Those are two different things. And if I'm doing my grading system in a way that does the one, does it do the other as well? And that's why people start to talk about these things. Ungrading's a notion emerged from these kind of debates, as well as, and here's the laundry list, alternative assessments, specifications grading, and then those are two big categories people like to play with when they talk about these things. And then mastery learning, contract grading. You write up a contract, like here's what I'm going to do. The student signs it, you sign it, and they pitch, here's what their grade's going to be. Competency grading, grading to standards, interview grading, which I have experimented with in the past, peer review, which I use a bunch, self-assessment I use a ton, narrative evaluation, portfolios, both things I've used in my courses, and all sorts of other hybrids that new innovations that you might use, others are using when it comes to innovating grading. And so there's this whole pool of tools with all different names that all stem from these kind of things. And the literature on grading generally gets into usually the philosophy of it first, and then here are the practices we recommend. And so as you start to read on this, you're going to find like, nuance for bringing it to your discipline or bringing it to certain types of assignments or certain types of challenges in the classroom. Um, So the big two, of course, are better pedagogical practices and the ratio of time to outcome. Sorry, I had to check what was next. So one of the things here is that we want to hold our grading practices to the same standard we ask for in our research. Pitt is an amazing research institution. We are trained as researchers to say, hey, we're going to take our theories, we're going to look at them carefully with scrutiny. We're going to evaluate them over time with multiple observations. We're going to then refine them based upon those things. And if we aren't doing the same with our grading practices, it's kind of an oddity. If you're the cutting edge of scientific research in your lab, but you're still using the same grading scheme that you learned your first year when you were an undergraduate in college, like hold it to the same standards as we hold our research, I think is a big part of the idea here. It also gets us to ask these big questions. One of the nice things about these practices under the ungrading umbrella, where the idea is we say to ourselves, what's the point of assessments? What happens when we deploy them to students? What would happen if we did them in a different way and we adjusted the mode in which the grades sort of transfer from the work students done to what exists in the grade book at the end of the term? And we can ask questions about what does this any mode of grading get students to actually do? That's one question. What does it get them to do when I set up these concerns? What happens on the back end? And then kind of related, but sometimes not as related as we think, is what does it get students to actually learn? Are we training them in the best ways to approach these things? Are they actually learning what we want them to learn? And if we can line that up better, then we're doing our best pedagogical practice. And it tends to be something that at least I hold very strongly. I know conversations with my peers hold really strongly. I think one of the nice things about these approaches is we can ask questions about our goal in the classroom and who those goals benefit, and who gains from those goals, who's served by those goals. Um, who gains from a strict rank ordering of our students where they are stretched out from this student is A plus and this student is D minus? Who gains from that? Well, some people gain from that. Uh, there are sort of economic incentives, career incentives, living in a world where we are all sort of set against one another. And the idea is, I can only get ahead by beating you. Well, that benefits from rank ordering students. Sometimes the goals of everybody moving beyond where they're at, everyone learning, everyone walking out of the classroom with a better idea of the thing that I'm teaching. Do some of our existing grading practices actually meet that everyone learning? Or is some of our decisions about the kind of like strict, here's my grading curve, here's the exam, sink or swim kind of style of teaching, is everyone learning from that, or are we making it so only certain people learn? And we might be tempted to say, well, only the best learn. But I think once you've been in the classroom for a few minutes, you at least can start to say, well, only those with the correct advantages so far are going to get the best out of that, or who those whose learning styles match the mode that I am distributing my assignments. They're the ones who succeed and flourish in those moments. And so better pedagogical practice, I think, gets us to focus in on what makes everyone in my classroom learn a little bit more over, what are the kind of divided and divisive goals there. Um, I show this. This is my one graphic that I sadly I don't have the reference to. This was handed to me on a sheet of paper. You can see it's a little fuzzy. Handed to me on a sheet of paper when I was a graduate student. It's Bloom's taxonomy, but it's also it's a really slick way of presenting it. And I have kept a version of this paper taped above my desk ever since, the year 2000 when I first received it. But you can find all sorts of versions of Bloom's taxonomy out there. Different scholars use it. What I like about all of these and ones that take the time to put in these words is we know that when we're asking students to do different things in the classroom, the actual language we use to get them to do it matters. And we get different outcomes based around what we ask. Above the stair steps, those are the types of things that get students to do these things. And so if I say, I'm going to lecture, then I'm going to get some knowledge accumulated, right, amongst my students. If I'm going to test them, I'm going to get some analysis done. If I'm going to have them do a case study, I'm going to have them doing some synthesis work. Likewise, the words on the bottom are the actual words that you put in the descriptions of your assignments to get them to do the thing. And so when I say list, students know to do something different than when I say recognize, different than illustrate, different than diagram, right? Those mean different things. And so these kind of approaches, I think, are a reminder that our we can dial in our assignments in some interesting ways. And what I think ungrading does in this environment is really get us to ask, are we asking our students to do the things that help them learn versus the things that help them get the grade? And those are two different outcomes, right? They well might be able to use some of these words and some of these things to get a grade, but is that the same as learning? And that's kind of where we want to ask those questions. Um, Ratio of time to outcome is the other part of the conversation here when it comes to ungrading. We all know that, I mean, maybe not all of us, but man, for most of us, at least for me, grading is the worst part of the job. It's painful. It feels either too laborious and when I would have it be too extensively feedback based or too like rote when I would try examinations and things like that. And so there's always this ratio of time to outcome. One of the promises that ungrading as an approach has is that the time input can feel more valuable from the instructor side, right? And I note I'm stressing feels more valuable. Doesn't mean less, can feel more valuable from the instructor side. When I've experimented with ungrading, when I have with the class I've moved fully to ungrading model, the time I'm putting in on that class, that feels like good time to me. I'm like, yes, this is working. This is helping. Students are benefiting from this on my end of the time in. Um, and if students buy into it, and I'll talk about why there might be some buy-in with students when we talk about what ungrading brings to the table, the outcomes ostensibly improve. Students buy in, they get excited about this. Therefore, the output, the learning that happens in the class ostensibly grows in some way. Hard to measure, but still some way. The nice thing about a lot of ungrading methodology is that students share the lift with some of the practices. They get involved in their own assessment of themselves. And so therefore they're doing some of the labor alongside you, which can help in the feelings of labor. And there is a shift in time input. And I will say that the most labor comes during the first iteration. The first time you decide to do an assignment that is ungraded or in the ungrading mode, or a whole class that's in this mode, that's the labor point. That's the workload point. And so it can take a lot of work to get it right. But as you go, the more and more you do it, the more you're okay, it's a more manageable time and I'm still getting these really good outcomes, or I might be even getting better ones because of these innovations I'm bringing to this. And I'm really fine tuning these instruments I'm using in the classroom. All right, so the elephant in the room, coping with increased class sizes. I found this picture from photographer Sam Hood, the elephant's tea party somewhere in Australia. I think it's important to address the elephant in the room. I don't like it when it's like, hey, here's this talk going on. Why? Well, because we've been having conversations with chairs and Doug's and the dean's office about the increasing class sizes that are going to happen and that have been happening, right? It's not just a one-off, though we're experiencing a very particular one-off I'm about to discuss. And so it's an elephant in the room, so I'm at least going to acknowledge it's there, right? Um, so we're Pitt is about to have some increased class sizes. The admission processes are complicated. There's the admits to the university. There's, the number of people once admitted that then deposit. Then there's melt, how many people have deposited who decide not to come. And through all this, admissions hedges their bets, right? This is one of those situations where better to overestimate than underestimate generally because you don't want to wind up with too small a class. So you're trying to hedge your bets on a bit larger of a class. If you're going to guess on the side that's less problem, depending on what you define problem as, FYI. About 3,000 students is the Dietrich School target enrollment number per year. Last year we were 2,900, so kind of like, well, we're a little low this year. So we want to do a little bit more admitting. So convey that to admissions. Admissions conveys that to us. And we do a slightly higher admit number. Um, but this year, students deposited way more than we expected, significantly more than we expected. We're projecting 3,500. That is if MELT stays the same. MELT is students choosing not to come after all. There's some discussion happening that some of the most wealthy students are just depositing in multiple schools and sucking up the rather healthy loss of that initial deposit when they decide to go elsewhere. So we could have a stunningly higher melt, because if that is indeed a practice that is spreading. But what we've been told is, about 3,500 is going to be this class. And again, not sure who actually is going to show up on August 26th, right? Which means with backfilling into our enrollment, those 100 students to backfill last year, it's about 400 more students in the enrollment ecosystem, which, if all those students are taking a 15 credit schedule, that's about 5 classes each. It's about 2,000 class seats that suddenly they're looking for, and that means they need to go somewhere. Bigger class sizes. Class sizes are the domain of management in collective bargaining. And so your department chair and the dean's office get to move those around to meet demand. And so we're expecting bigger class sizes. Thus, if you haven't, gotten that nudge from your department yet, that some class sizes are up, they're coming in some classes. It's temporary, of course, but still, well, we got to deal with this. And so all this discussion of, okay, we're going to deal with this temporarily. Again, hopefully we're going to right size it. We're going to fit. We did this before. We had, a very good recruitment during the pandemic, actually, which helped us cover some of the bigger melt that happened during the pandemic. And so again, it was a way bigger class than we expected, and we got them through, and we managed to do it, and helped us in that moment of difficulty. And so, it's not all a bad thing, but it means the faculty need to navigate that. And so sitting in these meetings, there's a lot of discussion of, okay, well, how do we, make sure and prepare our faculty on these things? And a lot of people are saying, well, we can train faculty on ungrading. Let's train faculty on ungrading. And so I said, okay, I can do that. Because I think it's important to have an ungrading conversation really earnestly and really openly with people. And because it's not a magic bullet for solving increased class sizes. I think it is a tool for making us better educators, better instructors, doing the university better as a whole. And there can be ways that it can help with some assignments and increase class sizes, but it's not a one size fits all. It's not some magic bullet. You can't just grab one of the books I recommend, read it in an afternoon, type some words in your syllabus and be like, boom, I got it. I got my, extra 5 students or more, depending on how many, right? So I want to be realistic about those things. So what ungrading and alternative assessment bring? The idea of ungrading, alternative assessment, and other things is having either multiple assignments that are not letter graded, but rather are just you complete them as part of the class. That's what we do here, kind of approaches to things. You're holding yourself to these standards, approaches to the classroom narrative. We've drawn a contract. Here's what you do as part of the contract with me. You've pitched your grade to me, and then therefore you've determined, like, to get an A, I will do the following. And I just sit back and watch you evaluate, did you do what you said you pitched? All those can be tools in that ungrading umbrella. And it can also include just a few more specifications assignments, things that, like, you did it, like the quality of it is guaranteed because of the care I have done in setting up the assignment. Like, if you did the assignment correctly, you got the quality out of it. There aren't, like this student here, they did A version of it, and this student over here did B version of it. That everyone who does it and does it right deserves the full credit for it. Approaches to things. All that's under this alternative assessment ungrading sort of lens. And it brings some really good benefits to the classroom. And this is honestly the list that sold me on it. I was skeptical when I was first presented this. Huge shout out to Corey Holding in English and Jennifer Hirsch in Psych, who I had conversations about this with, and like, uh, helped me see the value in these kind of approaches and really convinced me, like, okay, I could do this, and these are worth the investment. The big five that convinced me. One is it gives more student agency. It puts students into the driver's seat in the classroom in a way that might seem kind of scary at first. It really puts the onus on them, and they largely, in my experience, pick it up, right? Because they kind of get excited about the agency they have over themselves, and they can be the ones who can determine what good work is for them. I'll talk a bit more about that. It puts the focus on student learning in the classroom more than on student grading and getting the grades. The stress in the classroom changes. It doesn't go away. Ungrading is not some magic stress reliever. I find the stress spikes early in the term when I've done my ungrading classes. The students get really nervous when they read in the syllabus. And so the best examples of syllabi I've seen that do like full commitment to ungrading have big syllabi with long explanations. And you take, like my syllabus day ends up being, because I teach in a seminar format, it ends up being 2 hour-and-a-half segments over 2 days in order to really be like, here's what we're doing with this. Take some time to get students all on the same page. And stress is high, but then stress drops off when they realize, oh, I can just focus on my learning. I see a couple of questions in the chat. Great questions. How do you define ungrading? Ungrading is divorcing the learning process from and the assignment process from the scores and letter grades, using a different mode of you're going to give those things at the end of the term, and there is a process for assigning those things at the end of the term, but that's distinct from what comes in on any given assignment if you commit to a full ungrading approach. If you're just doing it for one assignment, then yeah, you don't give score or letter grade. You just say like, yep, 100% for that one, sufficient, S tends to be. And there's all sorts of nuances and complexities in that. Best class size works for ungrading. Deborah, great question. I do not have the answer for that. I've used full ungrading in a very small class, 18 to 20 students. I found I could do full ungrading. I've done effectively a partial ungrading in a classroom of 40 students. And in my 100 student classroom, I have some assignments which I'm able to do ungraded, but others just have to be graded because of those numbers. But it still helps in those things. And so you have to like, there's no one size fits all per size even. You kind of work it out based on your subject and your build. But great questions. Another advantage that it brings is variation in assignment structure. And I find that variation can increase attentiveness. Having like different types of assignments, students respond well from that. In order to do that, um, uh, they like variation, the like, well, you have 3 midterms and a final. They're all the same structure. They're all spaced exactly. Study for one, study for the next, study for the next, study for the summative. That might work fine for some students, but students can get much more attentive when it comes to, we're doing this now, then we're doing this, then we're over here. The two biggest for me, one of them is transparency. Um, I love when a classroom's really transparent and when I can say very clearly to my students, Like, here's why I'm doing this assignment. Like, here's why I'm asking you to do this. It's not merely professor says and you do, but it is instead like, I've designed this assignment this way because you get the following benefits out of it. And so see how that fits your learning. And the nice thing about ungrading is it can heighten that transparency because you're already having conversations about the why of assignments with your students in the first place. Finally, it resists patterns of domination. The there's a little bit of that, like, okay, I'm going to make you write an essay, and good essays get an A, and so essays get a B minus, and bad essays get a C minus, and totally terrible essays get a D, right? There's a ton of my bias in there. There's my training. There's my the curriculum I've grown up with. There's my worldview. There's the literature in which I've been steeped, right? Good writing in my discipline looks like this, but it doesn't look like that. All those patterns, this kind of pushes on those in some really neat ways. And it keeps some of that I'm the professor, so I am the ultimate authority on goodness out of the conversation. And instead, it becomes much more collaborative, right? It becomes, I can show you what traditional good writing in the discipline looks like, and you show me what your thoughts are on that and what works for you and what doesn't work for you. I can show you why these works or these practices are regarded as best, but you have the agency to engage with them much more openly, and we can all discuss them. So it really pulls the hood off in some neat ways, and that's why I like it. Do we need permission from the dean's office to make a class ungraded? Oh boy, no. Elizabeth, great question. I do think that talking to peers about it, to just do a double check before you deploy a thing, makes sense for every single assignment, every single syllabus. I think that's a good practice. I like to exist in a spot where we trust the instructors are engaging in good faith with improving the way that they're teaching, that they would step through this in a process that's thoughtful and say, okay, I'm going to engage these things thoughtfully. I'm going to figure out what works for me, what really helps my students. I'm, ostensibly knowledgeable in these things, so I'm going to do that and do those things. You can have if you're concerned about the effects it might have on something like your OMATs, that might be worth having a conversation with your peers, with the director of undergraduate studies, with the chair, things like that. It's good to talk about these things, I think. But I don't know any rule that says, I can somehow tell you this is the right way to evaluate students in this class versus that class. It's your classroom. You get to reasonably decide on what is the best. And it's part of the cool power of being a faculty member and being able to say, like, hey, I can really innovate here. This is a figure from a very good piece. Again, I'll have the reference at the end. It's one of the ones I find really useful because it's more from a natural sciences perspective than maybe some of the other writing, which might tend to be a bit more humanities, social science based. But this is Clarissa Sorensen Unruh's. The ungrading learning theory we have is not the ungrading learning theory we need, which is a really recent piece, really going through a lot of these models and saying, like, okay, there's some real advantages here. And but we need to study it more and think more about it before we dive in wholesale, which is something I definitely agree with. What I like about this figure, which I've taken from that piece, is it shows us the kind of like variation that different types of assignment can have and where they fit between student agency and just complying with the instructor, right? Like, I'm owning this myself versus I'm doing what they say. And then less student learning and more student learning. The stuff in red are like traditional grading techniques: binary grading, pass fail, equity grading, traditional grades, grading on a curve, and all the stuff in black, which you may already be doing some of this in your classrooms and not even know, like, oh, that's ungrading. Yeah. That these things are judged to get to some of the more sweet spot of higher agency amongst the students. They're taking control of it themselves, and they might be getting more out of these things. And so that's there. Speaking of OMETs, any difference in ungraded versus traditionally graded classes? There is research on it, yes. I have not noticed it in my OMETs. I've noticed longer responses in my ungraded classes. Students giving me longer, like, hey, I thought about this, and this is part of the assignment worked well, but oh, I really liked when we wrote the Supreme Court brief. That was really good to write that, an amicus brief. But then when I had to do this assignment, I thought this shouldn't be in the portfolio. I got really crunchy student evaluations in my ungraded classes. I didn't get any, on average, better or worse scores in my own. But definitely there are people that pay attention to those things. Um, all right, some myths about ungrading and alternative access. So I think it's important to address these myths. One is that this is all crazy radicalism, right? Look at these professors. Why they aren't even assigning grades anymore. I take this reference from Arrested Development. Math makes maybe feel sunshine behind a cloud, right? Science makes maybe feel like Elvis, right? They make a joke about a school that doesn't even use grades anymore. Um, I'm not convinced it's that radical. Ungrading practices are, at the core of them, us doing what we're supposed to be doing. I would think that adapting to the understandings of how students learn best and what reaches them better, and that might be radical. Or not radical, but that might be ordinary. That's what we ought to be doing. The radicalness might be experienced because we live in a world where people external to the university want students to emerge highly sorted for their convenience, right? I'm evaluating resumes for my job in this field, and I don't want to take the time to have to interview carefully. So could you please hand me a very polite number that I can then immediately judge students on and not actually take the time to get to know them and those things, sort of things. Ungrading isn't going to change those demands in that field. And ungrading still results in students getting grades, by the way. They still get, their grade for your class. And they still have a variety of outcomes in their grades. I still have students who fail my classes. I still have students who get C's in my classes that are ungraded. That totally happens. I'll talk a little bit about my particular experience in a second. But I don't think it's as radical as some people that detract from it might point out. Um, there are some myths that it might lessen the standards of our disciplines. If we're not, enforcing that all good writing has been the same since, Plato wrote down the words of Socrates, and good writing has been good writing the same way since then, and that this somehow lessens the standards of our disciplines because we have our student make a podcast instead of writing this out. I'm not sure I buy that. I think we can be adaptive. I think we can hold really high standards through ungrading practices. And in my experience, students have tended to say, the workload in this class is more than my other classes when it comes to my ungraded classes, but they also feel really good about the work that they did in that. So I don't view that as lessening the standards. I view that as myself upholding the standards of my students. Um, I think this is a myth that students will just give themselves the best grades due to career pressures. Right? I'm just going to give myself an A. Um, there's lots of ungrading practices that don't involve the students grading themselves necessarily. They can make decisions about the way that they submit things. They can make decisions about the order they submit things, when they're going to submit them, and so they have agency by their control over the situation, not necessarily just awarding themselves the best grades. But even in class like mine, my senior capstone, I literally have them like at the end of the semester, we have a meeting and they sit down and they all get weird about it. And I say, okay, what grade did you earn in this class? And they tell me, and I track it, I take good notes, and I have had more times I've had to convince a student, like, let me stop you and slow you down. maybe you might think about a slightly better grade for yourself because students sometimes are harsher on themselves than even we would be. I've had a couple students who have given themselves a grade that I thought was out of line of their work, but they laid it out and argued it, and I set up the rules that way. And so I said, okay. On the whole, they tend to be pretty good judges of themselves if you set up the machinery correctly. Um, and I think the other myth is it's easier on faculty and goes quicker when students just grade themselves. And I think this is behind that conversation of, oh, we're going to have bigger classes. Well, we just train our faculty to do some ungrading and it'll be so much quicker and easier on them. I do think that's a myth. I am not certain that ungrading is some magic bullet in that way. Um, I don't think it's easier and it's faster. My experience with converting a full ungrading model to a full ungrading model in a capstone class. I set up my capstone. We do it at our senior year. I was convinced, again, my colleague in psych, I literally like reference her by name in my syllabus because she just said the perfect thing, right? Jennifer Hirsch, she said, well, the senior capstone, this is as trained as the students will be in their specialty ever in their college career. And it's like, yeah, that's right. They will be able to be good judges of themselves. The best they could possibly be occurs in that class. So I will try ungrading in that space. Um, I find that better writing is easier for me to grade, and better work is easier for me to grade. And so that ended up being smoother on me. There was a labor spike in setting up the class. I had to work really hard to set up an ungraded class that was ungraded in full. Took a ton of work, to an iteration, showing it to my peers that I trusted, making sure it was right, making sure I liked the assignments. Took some labor. Was a spike at the beginning. Um, but when I was giving feedback, in part because I had them do feedback sharing with each other after training them how to do good feedback in the class, some of the load of giving feedback was upon them to their peers. And I could just give them good feedback and not worry about negotiated feedback or, like any one assignment being the one that would sink them. And so, I could call a spade a spade. Like this paper is a D, right? You didn't put the work in here. I wouldn't say D, but I'd say things like you didn't put the work in here. This needs way more citations. This needs that. And because I could do that in a spot of improvement rather than, and also here's the grade that gets attached to it, students were much more comfortable about receiving it and ended up turning in way improved drafts based around feedback rather than the general, like, I changed the 4 sentences you asked me to change kind of feedback response, but an actual real change to feedback. I saw in some of the work my students were doing. Um, Meetings took expanded time. Meeting with students, like to do it the way that I did, that took time. But it generated better student connections, right? I got to know the students better, having a midpoint meeting to check in where they set their goal for the rest of the term, that was in part of like their self-measurement, and then the meetings in the finals week where I had to sit down and have a 30-minute meeting for every student in the class. 20 students, 30 minutes meetings. That's a big chunk of my finals week doing that, but it really made me feel connected to the students, and so it was a powerful educational experience. I think they really felt like they were learning and they were getting a useful share of my time as instructor. And the nice thing is I could schedule my semester exactly from the very start. I knew exactly when all the labor would be coming. And so I knew how to adjust my schedule around those things. My students, I'd already worked out the meeting schedule by week 2 of exactly when I'd be meeting with every single student throughout the term. So it was a very smooth kind of approach to things when I converted to full ungrading. This is a mantra that supposedly comes from the U.S. Navy, but I think is useful for everyone everywhere. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. And I think it's really important to remember this when thinking about, okay, I need to deal with a slightly larger class potentially in the fall. What am I gonna do? Remember, slow is smooth, and smooth is fast when we come to these things. So, if in doubt, stick with the practices you know, seriously, right? Even though there may be people banding around, hey, ungrading could be great, well, could help you manage this. It really helped me get to better connections with student and end up being faster. If you're in doubt, stick with what you know because the familiar may handle the increase of students smoothly because it's familiar. And so the labor in of switching to an ungrading model suddenly become very labor intensive, and you're doing all sorts of new stuff in that term. It might be worth it to stick with the practice you know and just stick with it. Ungrading is not some magic fast bullet. Um, don't rush it if you do use it. Build a plan, think through the steps. Maybe decide on one portion of a class, decide on one chunk, one assignment, one aspect, innovate in that one area at first. Say, think about your syllabus and think about, okay, what's the moment where I really get into some crunch with students, and it's taking me a lot more time. Is there a way to do this where they can perform the task as just part of the class and it's not a part of the grade? It's just you have to do this to pass that class. And that's a very different approach to things, right? I can grade it in a very different way. Something like specifications grading can do that. And so you can do that. And don't reinvent the wheel. Adopt practices and make your own. There are so many different pieces of the puzzle. And again, I'm going to show you these spots where I've drawn some of my practices. There are specific people who are writing in your discipline who are doing these things, and adopt their practices. Try it out, like plug and play. That is perfectly okay to do those things. So, given these observations and knowing we're kind of closing at time here, um, my advice is sample the menu rather than eat the whole buffet. I I think there are ungrading style practices that you can put into specific assignments in your class rather than saying, I'm going to dive into 100% ungraded the whole way. And I might sample that. If you're looking for this as an option to ease some of the workload, handle some of the types of assignments a little bit better, this might be some good tools. Um, I think the important thing is to sit down with yourself and rethink the why of all assignments. And we should be doing that anyways with all of our work here, right? Before the classes got larger, even the classes getting smaller. Why am I asking to do this? What do they get out of it? What does the ask of them produce in their learning? And why does that meet the aims of my classroom? Constantly going back and asking ourselves those things, I think can be really helpful. Again, more rewarding an assignment that feels transparent to them. They understand it. They know why you're asking it. They see what they get out of it, right? I routinely will tie mine to outcomes in the labor market in political science. Like, look, this is the ways that people produce their work. This is the kind of things that we do in the large share of jobs that you as students might be seeking in this. And so this is the reward for this, right? And that rewarding means more buy-in, which might mean better work, which at the end of the day might mean eased grading. Not easy grading, but eased grading. And have a realistic approach to where labor time lies. Be very cognizant that there is a high setup labor time. These practices, they can get smoother as you go. My time in class smooth, but the setup can be a lot. And so it's not kind of just like it's not a panacea. We can't say, oh, the class is going to be a little bit bigger. Just ungrade it, you'll be fine. I don't buy that. I do buy that ungrading really helps us with students and really can help us manage larger classes if we're thoughtful, but there's some labor there. All right, so given that we talked about labor, I want to give you a sample timeline strategy because, like, you can't just say, all right, it takes some labor and then good luck with it. So if you are the type of person like me that uses your summer to plan up a little bit, here's a sample timeline that I think you could do, and you could think about how to do a chunk of your class or the whole class if you're really feeling like it, if you get excited, or just a little bit of it. You can do that with this timeline. So the rest of May, read up on the specific practices. Read a couple of these articles. They don't take a terribly long time to read. Particularly the ones in your discipline might be most helpful. People's experiences, what types of classrooms it really works in, what types it doesn't work in. Um, have those kind of conversations. I know when my department decided, when we went through our what classes to increase, we were very thoughtful about the way that we would do this. And like these classes, they can flex a few more students. These classes, they can't flex more students because of the nature of the way it's provided. And we were careful to say, we're only going to increase the ones that we know can flex. And that's what we did when we did our submission to the dean's office about where we might increase some class sizes to handle this. So rest in May, do some reading. Uh, Again, Bloom's ungrading, Stommel's undoing the grade. I like Bloom's ungrading. I think that was the one that was most helpful to me. It showed the most variety of different approaches, and I really liked that. As an edited work, a lot of different voices there. And again, that Clarissa Sorensen Unruh piece from last fall that does a really good like here's all of them and here's where the gaps are still. And so if you're a little skeptical, a little more skeptical, maybe start with the Unruh, Sorensen Unruh piece. If you're like, maybe I can try this, the Bloom reading might be good. Would it be possible to create meetups, working groups, faculty that are working on converting to a complete ungraded course? Deborah, absolutely yes. That is not only possible, but is something that I would love to help with, and I'm happy to help with. I'll talk about that in a second. Great point. And I saw a slightly longer one from Rachel that I definitely want to address more in full once we're done here. So then early June, think through some assignments. It takes 20 minutes of actual sitting there thinking time to think through an assignment once you have a sense of what these do. If you did one a day for a few days, well, you've done your whole class with just 20 minutes a day. One of these things that, when you're a student, I always think about my students who come to me and they say, Andrew, I need another 3 days to write my essay. And I say, writing an essay does not take that long, right? It just doesn't take that long. It takes dedicated time. And so a little bit of dedicated time, we can get some stuff out of it. So you can try that. By late June, if you've identified 2 or 3 assignments that could be alternatively assessed, right? Maybe I have, these are the assessed things and your grade is based around those. And I have like a partial specification story. If you also do all of these over here, then you're going to get a C- in the class or better. If all assignments are done, these are the ones that you do in order to get C- or better. These I calculate the grade off of. You can do an approach like that, like a mixed specifications approach, and then you can proceed forward like that, and it could already be helpful. Yep. Thanks, Dan. I was gonna mention that. Yep, is accessible to all of us. Thanks for mentioning that. Makes it easy in the chat. Yeah, the Bloom Ungrading book is available in PitCat. Early July, like think about some others, adopt some solutions, build your own, actually write up those couple of those 2 to 3 assignments in the new mode. Late July, proofread them, write up and sign up sheet. You're still ready to roll for the term. But Andrew, you say, I do something with my summer. I'm not on contract over this summer. No, my summers are not about this. Understood. I totally understood. I want to be the goth kid on vacation over the summer myself. So sorry, that's a picture of that's from the SNL skit that just happened a couple weeks ago. But that's what I'll be doing. That's what my summers were like. And so being the goth kid on vacation. So I thought it was funny. Um, Here's an August only timeline strategy, right? Because I don't think this has to be the massive transformation. Before August, beach read one of these books, right? The stuff is fascinating. I find them challenging and intriguing to read the stuff in them about just the practice of teaching. What are we doing this for? Why are we doing this? That's valuable stuff. That makes me think, and I really enjoyed it. I find it fascinating just to read. And so beach read one of the books, skim through it as you're sitting there, go to the wave pool in South Park, hang out, your kids romp in the waves while you read these things, right? On August 18th, right? Pick one syllabus and think through the logic of each assignment on that one syllabus, right? Each assignment. What am I doing? Why am I trying to do some? Why am I trying to do with this? August 19th, identify 2 to 3 assignments that can be alternatively assessed. How can I do it a little bit differently? What would happen if I didn't give a grade for this, but it was just like, okay, everyone needs to do that to be successful in this classroom. How would that change these things? Um, uh, Zendaya's question, sharing examples. Absolutely. I'm happy to show my examples if you want to connect with me afterward. Again, that's what the Blum book and the other books include in droves. Like, here's examples of how you do this. There are so many, it's hard to be like, and here are the 6 you should look at in a presentation. Um, August 20th, right? Check what others have done to do these things. Read a couple, find a couple journal articles on teaching, practice, and discipline, ungrading in neuroscience, ungrading in, film studies, whatever. Pick your poison, wherever you're in. Someone's written on it, someone's thinking about it. And on that day, look at a couple. One of them will pop out and seem good. And then on August 21st, proof a write-up of one of them. Give it a try. No class is broken because 1 or 2 assignments you decide to grade in a slightly different way. And, if at the end of the day you're like, oh, I didn't like the way that turned out, you can adjust and, you can say like, hey, this is my experiment assignment. And like being transparent is part of that. So that's a timeline if you want to, uh, if you're like, I need to have my summer off, but you can still think about these practices, I think. In conclusion, ungrading is an approach to better teaching overall. It is not a quick fix. Um, it does, I think, allow for better time spent. It feels better as an instructor. I think students respond to it in a much more meaningful way. Might some of your like the students who really need a push to be successful, your C students, your C minus students, um, sometimes in my experience, this can really be transformative for them, but sometimes it takes a little bit of a nudge, and maybe a check-in with them to make sure that they're bought in. But a little bit of outreach can do that. And I do think it leads to better outcomes because students, when they're stressing less about the work, they do better work. Um, Remember that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Don't rush into something. Think about it. Be careful about it. If you decide, I'm just going to run my class like it is with a few more people, that's going to get you through it, being smoothly at the very least, and smooth is fast. Don't reinvent the wheel. Sharing in community practice is really critical, and discuss this with peers. The Teaching and Learning Center is full of people who are really good at this stuff, and know these things. One of the people in the Teaching and Learning Center, Megan Keppel, I worked with on my ungraded syllabus and got feedback on. There are people in your discipline. There may be people in your department who are experimenting with this. And I'm around all summer. I'm on duty all summer as a dean, and I'm happy to chat about this stuff. This is the fun work for me. And so if all 30 people that came to this talk said, shot me an email and wanted to meet with me over the summer, that would be a good summer for me. I would enjoy it. So feel free to email me. I'm happy to chat anytime about these things. And if you would be like, hey, I want to, if Deborah's suggestion of, hey, like, would there be like a workup, a meeting, a meetup? If enough people get excited about this, I'm happy to do meetups or a syllabus share, things like that. I can absolutely do those things. That's fun for me. So I'm happy to. Starts by emailing me, and you can find my email. Um, Time for the Q&A. Thanks for your time. I'm happy to discuss. If you want to take a screenshot at this moment, it'll show you the Bloom book entitled, Stommel book entitled, and the Calista Sorensen Unruh article. So you can grab that one and go. Give it a second, and then I'll stop the share. I'll thank you all for your time. You're amazing for taking the time to think about these things. And I'm available as a resource. And now we can chat.